supporting Monterey Audubon Society. I think I've met most of you in this room. I am now Shannon Simpson. I'm Executive Director of Monterey Audubon Society, and we've got several of our board members here if anybody wants to introduce themselves afterwards. And we're super excited to have John Tsortos here tonight with us talking about birding in New Zealand. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. Awesome. All right, thank you everyone for coming tonight. This is super exciting to have so many people here to listen. So for those of you who don't know, my name is John Tsortos. I live up in San Jose, but I spend a lot of time down here in Monterey between volunteering at the aquarium, helping out with a Point Pino Scene Watch, and also helping out as a spotter on some Monterey seabirds pelagic trips. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation here. So before we get into it, I want to talk about what my justification for going to New Zealand was. So I have heard so many stories from people on boat trips out here in California about this magical land of just endless seabirds in New Zealand. It's the breeding location of most of the large-bodied shearwaters we get out here. The tube nose diversity down there is incredible. So that was one of the main guiding principles for going down to New Zealand. And it was really the only guiding principle that put New Zealand on my radar. And, you know, of course, I appreciate things like kiwis and some of the other birds too. But the trip was really about seabirds. Let's see. There we go. So this is just a quick overview of what my trip looked like. So there's like 3 main clusters of points that I birded. These are eBird hotspots for those of you who aren't familiar. So I spent about a week up on the North Island in this area here, a few days down on the South Island here, a couple days on Stewart Island, which is this tiny one down here, and we'll get a better look at that later. And then a few more days out on this part of the South Island. You might be wondering, why did you choose those locations? Those are all locations where pelagic trips were going out to see seabirds. So that's kind of what drove where I was going. And then the birding that I did in those areas kind of came as a secondary thought. But just here's some quick information. To get in between these locations, it's pretty far to drive. So I did a few domestic flights. So one from Auckland all the way down to Invercargill, one from Invercargill all the way up to Christchurch, and then from Christchurch up to Auckland. And then within each of those places, I rented a car to get around. So a little bit of context on New Zealand. There's a lot of information here. This is kind of like the natural history timeline of New Zealand. But the main points here is New Zealand split from Australia a long time ago, or sorry, from Antarctica a long time ago, and then split from Australia right around that time as well. This split was really significant because it happened before most of the modern types of mammals had evolved. And that split also potentially happened before snakes evolved, although that's a little harder to determine because snakes don't fossilize very well. But the most important thing here is that the birds of New Zealand evolved without the presence of land mammals and snakes as predators for millions of years prior to humans arriving. So that means the birds evolved to fill niches that are traditionally filled by mammals pretty well anywhere else in the world. So I know it really makes you start to think about some of those unique birds that they have down there. And then just some like other context here, important information. 80% of New Zealand's population lives on the North Island. So by the time you get down to the South Island, it's pretty rural out there. And then also very important fact here, there's about 4 sheep for every person in New Zealand. And this is actually a historical low in the last 180 years. It used to be higher before. Okay, so here's a closer look at the North Island. So the structure for this presentation, I figured I'd get all the land birds out of the way initially, and then we would move on to the seabirds. This is kind of the breakdown of some of the places that I went to on the North Island. So in the Auckland area, down here, and then also in the Whangarei district, in Maori, which is the traditional language in New Zealand. WH, I believe, is pronounced with an F. So I say Whangarei, but that's how it's spelled, and I might be mispronouncing that. And the Whangarei district is a bit further north of Auckland. couple hours. And then here's the South Island, some of the places that I went to. So just a closer look. There's Stewart Island down there, Milford Sound's out here, and then Kaikoura, which we'll talk about later, is over there. Okay, so let's get into some of the land birding. So on the North Island, the first place I went to is this regional park called Tawhara Nui. So this park was really interesting. It's a predator-controlled peninsula. So usually when you hear about predator control, eradicating pests, things like that, we're talking islands. But this is actually a peninsula on the mainland, which is cool. It's about an hour drive from Auckland, and the habitat diversity is awesome. They have these really extensive sandy beaches. They have open meadows, native forests, and then a lagoon with tidal wetlands. And I think this park here is an awesome conservation success story. So they do a lot of things in this park and throughout New Zealand as well. So something that I noticed in a lot of the parks that I visited, they had these traps everywhere, along the trails, in the forests, along roads, even if there wasn't a park there. There's a really, really dedicated effort to eliminate mammals that shouldn't be there. So those could be mice, those could be rats, or stoats, which is kind of like a type of weasel. So these were everywhere. Also, anytime you're entering one of the native forests in this park, they had this shoe cleaning station. So I think there's like a fungicide spray that you could spray on your shoes. They had brushes, and this was everywhere. And it's so cool to see how thorough they are about conservation, but also how much people embrace it. There's an organization in New Zealand whose goal is for the country to be predator-free by 2050, which is an insanely ambitious goal, but they're definitely taking steps towards that. And then to get into the park, they have this crazy fence, essentially cutting the peninsula off from the mainland, and this is how they prevent a lot of the predators from getting in there. And then they have these automatic gates that open up when a car comes that you can get through. And then one thing I will say, these automatic gates will open to let you leave even if the park is closed. Just important piece of information. A lot of people have been very nervous about that. So what are some of the birds that we can see out here? So this is one of the birds here, the red-breasted dotterel. This is a member of the plover family. I don't have too much to say about this bird other than they are so beautiful. And I think they nest in the sandy beaches along the peninsula there. They also have the New Zealand pigeon, which is another striking bird. The New Zealand pigeon is nearly twice the size of like our normal rock pigeons. Like this is just a really large bird. They're incredibly clumsy flyers. And oftentimes when I saw them, they were like in the dense canopy of a forest. And I could never really picture how such a large, clumsy bird could navigate a dense forest, but they find a way to do it. And then another one of the birds that I saw in Tawhara Nui is the kaka, which is one of the 3 endemic parrots within a family of parrots endemic to New Zealand. So this is a very unique bird. This one's a bit more adaptable. So you find this throughout both the North Island, the South Island, some of the offshore islands as well. But this is a really beautiful bird. They seem pretty social. I found them in pretty big groups in the canopies. And when the light hits them just right, you get all this beautiful coloration on them. And then one of my absolute favorite birds from this trip is the tui. So when I've talked with other people about New Zealand, everyone mentions the tui. And someone said the tui reminds them of a bird that would be extinct. Like if you think about, opening up this book and seeing some old illustration of this beautiful striking bird, that's exactly what comes to mind. These birds are also really adaptable for whatever reason. They were everywhere. They were in urban parks in Auckland. They were in native forests. They were in non-native forests. So anywhere you were birding in New Zealand, chances are you could hear one of these birds. They have this like crazy metallic call and all these different sounds that they make. And they can fly, but they're not great at it. So anytime you'd hear like really labored, loud flapping wings, there was a tui going overhead. So that was Tafara Nui. Just a really quick little journey through that park. The next place that I went to is called Tiri Tiri Matangi. So this is an island wildlife sanctuary, and this is another place that has predator control. So you can take a ferry from Auckland. They only operate for part of the week, so keep that in mind if you're planning a trip. It's about an hour-long ferry. You have some seabirding opportunities on the ferry. I saw some flesh-footed shearwaters, Australasian gannets, white-fronted terns, and a surprising amount of parasitic Jaegers. It's like this one little stretch in there where there's a lot of terns, and the boat went through and like 5 Jaegers came off the water, which is really cool. And then you can do a day trip. Weekends it's about 6 hours, weekdays it's 4 hours, but you can also stay overnight. It fills up fast, there's really high demand for it, and not a lot of places to stay. But I think this is one of the best ways to experience the island because you're on the island when other people have left. If you go for a day trip, everyone gets off the ferry at the same time, everyone's on the trails at the same time, and the birds don't like that. So I think that made it a little tricky for me. I was only there for a 4-hour day trip, but you can see a lot of really incredible birds on Tiri Tiri Matangi. I think my absolute favorite bird on this island is the South Island takahe. So this is a flightless rail. It is the largest rail in the world. So other rails are, like the American coot or some of the other things we have. But this essentially looks like, maybe like a purple gallinule, but just larger and denser. These birds are awesome. This bird was believed to be extinct until a really small population was found in the Southern Alps down on the South Island, which is why it's called the South Island takahe, even though I'm seeing it on an island in the North Island. But they like alpine meadows, so like really unique kind of habitat for these birds. But anyway, they found a really small population, and there's been really extensive efforts to conserve the species. It's tricky because they're flightless, so they're vulnerable to predators. They are very long-lived and have very few offspring. And they get outcompeted for food with some deer that have been introduced onto the South Island. So they've made efforts to relocate populations to different parts of New Zealand. So this island sanctuary is one of those places. But when you have flightless birds, it's kind of tricky. You have to make sure you're managing which birds are breeding with which birds, because at a certain point, flightless birds on one island are going to become very inbred. So, but yeah, fantastic bird. It's a bird that I actually did not get to see when I was there. There's like a 2-week period in the spring where these birds breed and they get really secretive. And that was the 2 weeks that I was there. So I did not get to see one and I'm sad about it, but it's okay. I'll see it next time I go. Another bird that you see out there is the stitch bird. So I was really worried about finding this bird because it's a dense forest. I only had 4 hours. But what's really cool is along the main trails, they set up bird feeders and bird baths all over the place. So there's a lot of really good opportunities to just hang out at one of those feeders and wait for these birds to come in. And that's where I got the opportunity to see one of these birds. Not much more to say about it, but I just think they're really striking birds. This bird here, the North Island kokako, is another bird you can see on this island. This is one of New Zealand's endemic wattle birds. So you see those wattles on their face there. Really beautiful bird, and they have this like super eerie call that usually you hear early in the morning. So this is another reason why staying overnight might be a good idea. This was unfortunately a bird I did not get to see either. And then we have the North Island saddleback, which is another one of New Zealand's endemic wattle birds. You can kind of see the similarities in the wattles between the kokako and the saddleback. This was, yeah, another really cool bird we saw. And then you can also see the little spotted kiwi. So I'll just do a quick little, intro crash course into kiwis. So kiwis are nocturnal and they're flightless. What's that? Oh yeah, it's a flightless bird. Yeah, so nocturnal and flightless. So again, staying overnight on this island is a great opportunity to be able to see one of these birds. Kiwis are one of the birds that really fills the niche of a mammal. Behaviorally, they're essentially a mammal. Their main feathers, are more hair-like than they are feather-like. They have repurposed feathers at the base of their bill, which essentially act as whiskers. Their nostrils are at the end of their bill, and they use their bill for probing and smelling, kind of like the snout of a mammal. So kiwis are super cool. If you have the chance to get out there and go see one, I highly recommend it. Okay. So after Tiri Tiri Matangi, I went and visited the Miranda Shorebird Center. So this is about a 2-hour drive from Auckland. They actually have housing out there, which is really cool. You can stay the night. They have an interpretive center, and they have guided walks, and they actually have scopes to borrow, which is really awesome. I brought my scope with me to New Zealand, and in retrospect, I probably didn't need to, because this was really the only opportunity I had to use one. They also do a lot of conservation work between banding and tracking some of the shorebirds, and some of those shorebirds that they get are bar-tailed godwits, which, if you don't know, are the bird that hold the record for the longest continuous migration. They migrate all the way from the top of Alaska down to as far as New Zealand in one shot. It's like 8 to 10 days of flying straight. Bar-tailed godwit, yes. So out at the Shorebird Center, they've actually put geolocators on these birds and have been able to track their migration. The Pacific golden plover doesn't get mentioned as enough, but they also do almost as extraordinary of a migratory route. But usually they stop in one of the islands further north in Oceania before continuing down to somewhere like New Zealand. But this is a photo I took of thousands of bar-tailed godwits just hanging out there, which is awesome. And this organization also does international outreach and agreements with different countries. So they've worked with North Korea, they've worked with China. I mean, these are countries that you never would think would be interested in this kind of stuff, and they're able to reach out and educate them on why their lands there are really important to the international migration that these birds do. So that was a really awesome place to visit. All the staff there were super friendly. And another bird that we got to see was the wrybill. So the wrybill is a type of plover, kind of looks like a snowy plover, but if you look closely at the bill, you'll notice it's actually curved to the side. So every wrybill, its bill is curved. I believe they're all curved to the same side, but it's the only bird that I know of, I think, in the world that has its entire bill just shifted to one side. Scientists have no idea why they do this. There's like some theories. Maybe it helps them poke around in the rocks in rivers when they're foraging. But these birds are super cool, and one of the iconic endemic birds of New Zealand. Okay, cool. So that was some Miranda Shorebird Center. Another place I visited on land was Milford Sound. Milford Sound is probably one of the most stunning landscapes I've ever seen in my life. It's very remote. I do not recommend doing it all in one day like I did, because it was a lot. It was like 3.5 hours up, a couple hours there, and then 3.5 hours back. And then there's some key species that you can see out in Milford Sound. I didn't get to see the rock wren, but the kea, the blue duck, the Fiordland crested penguin are all out there. And we'll take a moment to talk about one of those birds. So this is the kea. It looks similar to the kaka, which we talked about earlier. So this is in that same endemic parrot family to New Zealand. They're an alpine parrot species, which is really unique. They live in the Alps down on the South Island. They're also related to the kakapo. That's the third member of that family. Their plumage is absolutely stunning in flight. When they're kind of just sitting there, they don't really look all that exciting, but when they open those wings, it's incredible. They are an enemy of the sheep. So this is actually a really big conservation issue with these birds. Is for, I don't know, the last 150 years, sheep farmers have been at war with them, because sheep farmers would swear that these birds were killing their sheep, and no one believed them for the longest time. They're like, how the heck is this parrot going after these sheep? And what they eventually found out, and they have footage of this, and people have seen it. For whatever reason, certain individuals at certain times of the year get really interested in eating the fat on sheep. So these birds will land on a sheep and just start pecking under its under its skin to get at the fat. And then if that happens for long enough with enough birds, the sheep could end up dying. So really just bizarre birds. They're also incredibly intelligent and curious. And I found that out very quickly. So oftentimes you don't have to worry about searching for this bird in the forest. You can just go to one of the parking lots on the way to Milford Sound, and they're there, just checking everything out. So this is a little collage of photos I captured of a Kia. This was maybe, in 15 minutes of being around this bird. It was, the road I think was recently repaved and it seemed to be licking the pavement. Maybe it tasted unique, I'm not sure. It was picking at someone's shoe. This is it tearing up my rental car. So there's a funny story with this. So I pulled over the side of the road because I saw these people hang out with this Kia. And I walked all the way from where I parked down to this Kia. We're hanging out, we're looking at the bird, we're taking photos. And then the bird flies over me all the way back to where I parked, and it lands on the mirror and it starts, picking at the window. And they really like this rubber here on the edge of the window. They really, really like that. So it starts picking at the car, and I'm giggling. I'm like, oh no, So I walk over, I shoo it off, and then the bird flies back to where it was before. And I was like, okay, I've sent a message to this bird. It's not going to do this again. And the bird waited for me to walk all the way back out to where it was. And the second I was there, it flew back over me, back to my car, and started picking at the rubber. And at that point, it made some damage. But I was shocked because it really felt intentional. And this is something that people have reported before. These birds will communicate with each other. They'll be on lookout. Some will distract a person so the other ones can go in and steal their car keys or tear up their rental car. And then the last thing I saw, there was a cigarette on the ground, and this bird picked it up, and I thought it was going to eat it, but it just held it there in its bill for like, I don't know, a minute or so. And you can actually see its tongue sticking out and licking the cigarette. So I don't know if the cigarette tasted interesting or what the bird was doing, but this was just like in 15 minutes. I mean, and with one bird. So if you go out here, watch out for your cars and your possessions. And yeah. This right here is the, So yeah, this is like the lower bill here, and then there's the tongue kind of in the middle. Yeah. I think like $30. I was a little upset about it, but if it's for a Kia, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so that was my quick look at land birding in New Zealand. Let's see how we're doing for time. Okay, good, perfect. So now I want to shift gear and talk about New Zealand pelagics. So I have done a lot of pelagics in California. So I thought I had like a pretty good sense of what a seabird boat trip looked like. But in New Zealand, it's completely different. So first, the boat is a lot smaller. Their boats are about 30 feet long. The ones we have out here usually are about 55 feet long. A lot less people go on the boat. So we're looking at like 7 to 10 people total, including the captain and the guide and any deckhands or anything like that. The boats are faster, and I feel like they're a bit more resilient to tough weather conditions and choppy water. They also have these large sheets or like tarps that they'll put up when we're moving through rough water, and it prevents you from getting sprayed on, which is awesome. And the way they do the trip is very different. So here in California, you get on the boat and you're essentially motoring the entire like 8, 10, 12-hour trip. Unless you see a bird, you stop and observe it, of course, but you're really moving for most of the trip. Occasionally, some operators will throw out some chum, but even then, you're just stopping for 20, 30 minutes, and then you're moving for most of the time. In New Zealand, you're chumming for most of the time. So you commute to the chum spot, and then you sit there for the entire trip. And the birds are so interested in the chum that we throw out that you don't really need to move, which was shocking. And then because they're coming into the chum, the birds are so close. Like, you're within arm's reach at times of storm petrels, shearwaters, albatrosses, even pterodromas zipping by. There was like a couple times where I thought a Cook's petrel was going to hit me in the face. But they're much better flyers than that. And the other thing that was really interesting is you can't actually seek out other marine life. So if you're on a bird watching boat, you can only look at birds. And this is something that I think the Department of, I know that's what some people would prefer. But when things get slow, it's nice to go look at a whale every once in a while. But I believe there's really strict regulations that the government or Department of Conservation set. They essentially don't want, one whale to be mobbed by a bunch of different boats. So the whale watching boats can go to the whales, the bird watching boats can go to the birds. And if a whale happens to come up next to your boat, that's okay, but you just can't intentionally go to it. So that's very different, because out here, when things are slow and you see a whale breaching, you're going to go check that out. And oftentimes you find birds there. So that was really interesting. Okay, So the first pelagic trip I did was out of this place called Marson Cove. So you can kind of see it right down here. This was with Ryebill Tours. So Ryebill Tours is a local bird guide company. They mostly do multi-day, like cross New Zealand birding tours. But part of those tours are pelagic trips. And I think what's really smart by them is they open up spots on those pelagic trips to people who aren't interested in the 21-day tour, but just want to do a pelagic trip. So that was pretty cool. So I didn't sign up for any of the really long, extensive tours. I was just able to sign up for individual pelagic tours. This one went out to the Hen and Chicken Islands, which are breeding grounds for all sorts of different seabirds, and these are some of the birds you can expect to see. I think we saw all of these on our trip, and we'll get a look at that. So let's see. Okay, first I'm just going to quickly play a video here. So this is this is what the day looked like when we were first going out. I had actually had a pelagic trip the day before get completely canceled because this storm front was coming through, and I was torn up because I had trips planned for 3 days in a row, and I thought the storm would wipe them out. But the trip out to Marson Cove, I thought for sure was going to get canceled, and they're like, "No, we're doing it. It's going to be fine." So the boat was like super resilient. Like I said, they have like windshield wipers to wipe stuff off. It was raining, the water was choppy, but with the sheets that they put up, everyone stays dry. And then once you get out to the chumming spot, you're just sitting there, so you don't really need to worry about going through the chop. The other really cool thing is because we're going to these islands, is they use those islands as like a wind and weather barricade. So based on how the wind's blowing, we can go to one side of the island, and if it starts blowing the other way, then we can go to the other side of the island. And if we want to break, we can go into the middle of the islands where it's completely calm, even though it's like crazy windy out around the island. So I was really impressed. And the boat's fast. We're able to reposition pretty quickly. So it really didn't matter, other than just, that like 30, 40-minute commute out to the islands. It didn't really matter how choppy it was. Let's see. It's gonna let me. Oh, okay, we saw this. Okay, there we go. So we eventually got out to the chum spot. We put out, some pieces of fish. That's usually what we're chumming with is, we cut up some fish. They're throwing that out, and then they might put out some fish oil as well. And within minutes, the first flesh-footed shearwaters were coming in. It's crazy how fast these birds can pick up on that scent and come into it. So within like the first 5 minutes of this pelagic trip, I got some of the greatest flesh-footed shearwater photos I've ever gotten in my life. If anyone's been on a California pelagic, when we see a flesh-footed shearwater, it's like super far out there. It takes flight and then it's gone, and no one really got to see it, and no one got a good photo of it. But here it was, just hanging out right next to the boat. You can see the feet down there. Another just spectacular thing about this boat trip is we saw 4 different Pterodroma species on one trip. So for those of you who aren't super familiar with seabirds, there's a group of petrels that are called Pterodromas, also known as the gadfly petrels. Pterodroma translates to winged runner. So these birds are known for being really elegant and efficient and fast flyers. Out in California, they're like a coveted species. It's really hard to see one. You have to go out at the exact right time of year and get the exact perfect conditions, and the trip can't get canceled because of weather. And all these things have to, overlap for you to be able to go out and see these birds here. And even then, it's not a great look. Here, it was like, they were going past the boat nonstop throughout the trip, and it was just incredible. So you have the mottled petrel, which breeds, I believe, on some islands south of New Zealand, like maybe in the subantarctic area. Gray-faced Cook's and Pycroft's petrel all breed in New Zealand on some of these islands out there. Another bird that we got to see so well was a white-faced storm petrel. So again, comparing California pelagics to New Zealand pelagics, when you see storm petrels here in California, they're like super far out. They're essentially like swallow size. This is a tiny, tiny bird. They're super floppy, erratic flyers, and they're kind of just, going right over the waves. So you see it for a second, it goes behind a wave. You see it for a split second again, and then it's gone. And that's it. In New Zealand, these birds come in and they feed off of the chum. So they're just like, they're going around the boat constantly. You have all the, time and opportunity in the world to take photos of them. And even with all those opportunities, 99% of your photos still look awful. But these were some highlights, like 4 out of the 3,000 photos that kind of turned out. Something that's really cool with the white-faced storm petrel, and I wish I could have gotten some better photos to showcase this, but the webbing on their feet is kind of this like yellowish white. You can see it a little here and there. And there are some better photos in Macaulay Library if you're curious, but that was cool to see. So those were some of the highlights on the Marsden Cove pelagic trip. Next, I went out of Tutucaca, this time with the petrol station. So this is another local operator, but the petrol station, as the name would suggest, just does seabirds. So it's this one guy, Scott, out there. He does all of his trips from the same port on the same boat, and he does them throughout the year. And he's collecting a lot of data for research purposes. So it's really cool to kind of control all these factors and see what's going on throughout the year to year. So this trip, it was about like maybe a 45-minute drive from where the first one went out. But we go offshore to the Poor Knights Islands, which is a main breeding site for almost the entire world population of buller shearwater, which is amazing. And we'll see a photo of a buller shearwater in a second. There are also breeding colonies of Australasian gannets and all sorts of other seabirds. So some species highlights here. So New Zealand storm petrels, which we also saw in the previous pelagic, but we'll talk about those in a second. We also got some albatrosses as well, prions, and then the buller shearwaters. This location specifically is known for these crazy feeding workups, where you go in between some of these islands, and there's literally tens of thousands of seabirds all going crazy foraging. What's really cool, what I found out when I was out there, is this usually happens on a calmer day. So when you go out on a pelagic trip, if there's absolutely no wind, it's really nice and comfortable, but you don't really get to see too many birds because they're not super active. What's really cool about this place is even on a calm day when the birds might not be flying around outside of the islands, if you go into the islands, odds are you're seeing this, which is an incredible spectacle. So here's us at the very beginning of the trip. So these are the Poor Knights Islands out here. So that's where the buller shearwaters breed. We don't go out there with the boats, but we do check out some of these islands here. So we have the High Peak Rocks there and Sugarloaf Rock there. So again, Poor Knights Islands are right there. This is a buller shearwater. This is one of the most beautiful species that we can see out here in California. This bird breeds down on these islands in New Zealand, and then when they're not breeding, they come all the way offshore of California and some of the other western states and forage here and wait out the New Zealand winter. It's kind of cool. Some of these seabirds, they go down there in the spring and the summer when it's very bioproductive and there's all this food. And then when it's winter time and things are cooling down, they come up here. And all of a sudden it's spring and summer up here and it's all bioproductive here in Monterey Bay. And so these birds are just taking advantage of food across the globe, which is incredible. So almost the entire world population breeds out there. This was, I think this is Sugarloaf Rock. So an exciting bird we saw in there was this gray noddy. Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting. I should have put a label on it. But anyway, this is a bird that breeds out in Sugarloaf Rock. This was the first one of the season, so that was cool to see. But they come back in good numbers and breed out there. And then we have the High Peak Rocks, Australasian gannet colonies. We got to see some gannets doing some interesting activities. And then we also got to see some New Zealand fur seals, which was really exciting. I don't think they have a colony out there, but they do like to hang out there. So when you're going out on these boats, like I said, Scott leads them, and Scott's super awesome. When you're going out there, he does a little crash course on Cook's versus Pycroft's petrel, and he gets everyone around, and he pulls out the field guide, and we talk about all these field marks. But it's a game that you're playing basically the entire trip. So one of these birds is a Cook's petrel. The other one is a Pycroft's petrel. Do we notice any differences? Or do they look almost exactly the same? So the bird on the left here is a Pycroft's. The bird on the right here is Cook's. And just real quick, the Cook's, yes, the head shape is a little different. Perfect. So the Pycroft's petrel is a bit shorter necked, and usually its tail seems kind of longer as opposed to the Cook's, which is a bit more balanced. Tail sticking out, head sticking out. A lot of this changes based on the angle that you're looking at the bird too, so that makes it challenging as well. There's also some very subtle differences in the bill length, and anyway, that's a game you're playing the entire trip as these petrels are going by. You're trying to get photos, and then you go up to Scott and you're like, Scott, is this a Cook's or is it a Pycroft's? But yeah, so that's pretty cool. The Pycroft's petrel, these both breed in New Zealand. I think the Pycroft's petrel don't extend as far away from New Zealand when they're non-breeding. So off the coast of California, we do get Cook's petrels, but I don't think we ever get Pycrofts, or maybe we just don't get good enough looks at the Cook's petrels to know if they're a Pycrofts or not. So we assume they're Cooks. But I also got to see my first Southern Hemisphere albatrosses on this pelagic trip. So on the left here, I believe this is a Salvin's albatross. And on the right here, this is technically on eBird, it's a black-browed albatross, but this is the Campbell subspecies, which a lot of people would argue will be its own species once more research is done. These birds have like the craziest eye. As they get older, their eye gets pale, and it's this really intense look, especially with like all this almost eyeshadow that they have. And then another feature of this trip was getting to see the New Zealand storm petrel. So the New Zealand storm petrel is a bird that we didn't know existed until 2003 when Rye Bill, that initial bird tour company that I mentioned earlier, said, you know what, we're going to start doing bird tours and we're going to go out and we're going to do a pelagic trip. And on that first pelagic trip they ever did, they noticed this little storm petrel that looks a lot like some of the other Southern Hemisphere storm petrels, but it has this these kind of the black and white like striping, that texture on the belly, which the other birds don't have. So they were like, what the heck is that? And they scheduled a bunch of other trips to go out. There are stories of some of those trip leaders swinging butterfly nets around trying to catch the bird, and then they fall into the water and they come back onto the boat just in time for a mako shark to go by, and lots of crazy stories. And what's cool is that the guys that are running Ryebill tours today are the people that were involved in those stories. So if you do one of their pelagic trips, you can kind of hear those firsthand experiences. But eventually they were able to, I think, use some like net gun thing to catch one of these birds, take some DNA samples and run some tests. And it turns out that there were a few specimens of this bird from like the mid-1800s in France, I believe. And they realized that the birds that we're seeing here are the same ones that were gathered, you know, a couple hundred years ago. And it turns out these birds do exist and they're living out there and they've always been there. And now that more pelagic trips are run out there, you know, you can see them in decent number. But I believe they have like maybe like 1 or 2 breeding sites. So it's a really small and sensitive population. But when you go out there, they're there and they're spectacular. And, you know, they're circling the boat as well, just like the white-faced storm petrels. And then last thing I wanted to show, I don't know how well this video, so when I was taking videos on this trip, I was like, oh, I'm going to take videos and post them on Instagram. So I'm going to take them all vertically. And I regret those decisions now that I'm giving a presentation. So bear with the video quality, but you should be able to see these like tiny little birds going by. These larger seabirds are like shearwaters and petrels, but you'll see these little, like that was a storm petrel that went by. There's another one there, a few more. So like this is how close these birds are to the boat, and they're just doing that the entire time. And every hour, or like every, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, Scott's gonna be like, all right, time to do, you know, a New Zealand storm petrel tally. And he's sitting there counting all these little birds bouncing over the waves around the boat. So really special. And then here I have some photos of fairy prions. I don't have too much to say about them, but they were really cool. There were a lot of seabirds to photograph and talk about, though. I feel like I kind of didn't pay enough attention to them when I was out there. I was distracted by the storm petrels. But something that's cool is they have this like really like bright blue purple legs. It's hard to see in the photo, but anyway, some other birds we saw on the trip. Let's see. Okay. So next I went down to Stewart Island. So Stewart Island's all the way under the South Island at the very bottom. There's actually the population of people that live out there, about 440 residents. It's a dark sky sanctuary, so the light at night there is so dark that it gets a special distinction. And it really should be that dark because it's like almost at the bottom of the world, right? It's at the very bottom of New Zealand, and beyond Stewart Island is like ocean until you hit Antarctica. So a clear sky at night out here is stunning. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. It can also be very rainy though, so you could be out there for several days and it's raining every night and you don't get to see anything. So if you get to see the clear sky, you're very lucky. There's also Ulva Island, which is right next to Stewart Island. Stewart Island is not a predator-free island. It might be. Maybe it is. But Ulva Island definitely is. Ulva Island's excellent birding spot. There are water taxis that run daily. and local bird guides that lead walks out there too if you don't want to go and brave it on your own. These are some of the birds that you can prioritize out there. So you'll notice there's actually different kiwi species down here on Stewart Island than we talked about earlier, and it actually has its own subspecies. Same thing with the Stewart Island shag. There's its own subspecies down there, which might be split in the future. One of the absolute highlights of, oh, actually, before I move on, this photo here was taken with my cell phone from the dock. We have 1, 2, there's a second one back there, so 3, 4, 5 white-capped albatross, all visible with the naked eye from the dock. So just gives you an idea for what the seas are going to look like when we go out on a pelagic trip from there. So that was awesome. Another highlight from the same dock as well, when the sun starts to set, if you look at the rocks, you'll actually see some little blue penguins that are coming back to their little caves for the night. So what's also really nice is there's coverage. So even though it was raining when I was out there, you're still able to stand there and stay dry and watch all these little penguins. And we saw maybe 5 or 6 penguins climb out of the water and crawl into the rocks. I would have loved to have gotten better pictures, but it was actually really quite dark when we were out there, so the camera wouldn't have done better than my phone. Okay, so I went down to Stewart Island to do another Stewart Island, another pelagic trip. So this again was with Rybill. So they do a few pelagic trips out of different places in New Zealand. This was a larger boat. I think we had 12 people. Boat size was honestly maybe closer to what we'd have here in California. And this was a mix of chumming at sea, but also searching some of the small surrounding islands for different breeding birds. One of those birds is the Fiordland crested penguin, which we got to see. And we actually got to see a little cave of theirs as well with a juvenile bird. Another highlight of the pelagic trip was getting to see some of these birds porpoising. So that's a behavior that we see porpoises do, where they repeatedly jump out of the water, go back in, jump out again. So I got to see some Fiordland crested penguins doing this, and I tried my best to photograph them. It's really hard, but that was so cool to see. Usually you would see it when you're kind of closer to shore, and you can even see this from the ferry as well when you're coming into Stewart Island or maybe out of Milford Sound, but really awesome behavior. So on the pelagic trip, I managed to see some flightless rails, which I did not think would be possible on a pelagic trip. But as we were going around one of the small islands, we have 2 wekas here. So this is a species of flightless rail, and they're actually squaring off. They started getting into it, which was really fun to see. And then all of a sudden, they both ran off. And we're like, why? Like, surely one of them won the fight, right? They can't both lose. And we realized it's because this brown skua swooped in and actually took a swipe at one of the birds. But it managed to escape before the skua could inflict any harm. And we actually got some really cool experiences with the skua shortly afterwards. So we continued around the island, and we went out to this rock where a pair of brown skua are breeding. So if people aren't familiar with skuas, it's spelled S-K-U-A. They're these like bully seabirds. Their whole MO is, beating up other birds to take their food, or straight up killing other seabirds, scavenging carcasses of different things. They can be nasty birds, but they're really cool, and they can do cool tricks. So in this video, you're going to see, this is a brown skua here. It's flying over to the boat, and they threw a piece of chum up, and the skua catches it in the air. And it did this a few times without fail. It's actually pretty impressive, and that's what this photo is here. So yeah, it like swoops in right over your head, and yes, I definitely can. I'm also happy to send, reach out to me afterwards, and I'm happy to share this footage with you. Those albatrosses are white-capped albatrosses, and we'll get a look at those in a second. Don't worry, Amanda. So I have a few more photos. So the skua circled the boat so many times, and it gave me so many opportunities to get photos of it with different backgrounds. Really cool birds, despite the way they live their lives. Does audio work? If I have audio on should that work, you think? Okay, well, we'll try. I'm gonna try and play the video, Shannon. We'll know in a second. Okay, you can hear it from my laptop here. So here we have a group of white-capped albatrosses. And what's happening is they're throwing chum out to those albatrosses, and they're all fighting over it. I just think the way they vocalize is so cool. Does anyone want me to play that again? I'm happy to. Yes, okay. Those are Cape petrels or pintado petrels. I'll have some photos of them in a bit. And then here I'm pointing out there's going to be a large albatross that flies, southern royal albatross. We'll see more from those guys later. But although most of those albatrosses there in the mix are white-capped albatrosses, this is like the most common albatross. I think one of the most numerous albatross populations in the world. Definitely the most common that you see on these pelagic trips. So we'll answer some of those questions in a second. But here's a photo that I got of a southern royal albatross. That's what I was calling out in the video, swooping in to join the action. The southern royal albatross is one of the great albatrosses. So this bird is quite a bit larger than the whitecaps. The whitecaps are in this group called mollymocks. It's like the word they use in New Zealand to refer to them. They're a little bit bigger than the albatrosses we get here, so like black-footed Laysan albatross. The southern royal albatross is even bigger than that. So like the mollymocks have maybe 7-8 foot wingspans. I think the royal albatrosses get up to like 10-foot wingspans. And I think they're a little smaller than the wandering albatrosses. So when the southern royal joined the scrum, it was definitely getting involved and trying to get some of that food away from the smaller birds. It was throwing its weight around. And at some points was, stealing the food right out of the mouth of poor white-capped albatross over here. And, we were sitting there, and one of the guides next to me, he says, if these great albatrosses realized that they could just gobble up some of these smaller seabirds, like it would be over, there's nothing these birds can do. So he says that, we all laugh. And then a few minutes later, something really interesting happens. So what had happened was we threw out a piece of chum, and this black-browed albatross here came in, ate that piece of chum, and the southern royal albatross didn't take too kindly to that. So it grabbed this bird from behind its head and held it for, I don't know, at least a minute. And we were all just silent. We were like, what's going to happen? This is crazy. And what ended up happening was eventually this black-browed albatross realized, there's nothing I can do here except throw up what I just ate. So it regurgitated the fish. The southern royal albatross let go of its head, and it ate that fish happily. Then we threw out another piece of chum, and not a single other albatross moves. And the southern royal slowly just comes right in, grabs the fish, and eats it. So definitely sent a message to the other albatrosses. Okay. Yeah, it was really cool to see. I'm kind of running tight on time here, so I'm just going to start flying through. These are the Cape petrels that I had mentioned earlier. These are quite small, and they also enjoyed hanging out in the scrum, they were just waiting for little pieces of chum. They couldn't eat those whole pieces of fish, but they're surprisingly brave, especially after witnessing that whole display with the southern royal albatross. They were still happy to be in there and, go for scraps that other birds were kind of ignoring. But they were with us the whole time. They're just really beautiful little birds. Something else that we got to see on this trip was a third species of penguin. So this is a yellow-eyed penguin. This is a species endemic to New Zealand. And it's one of the rarest penguin species in the world, which I essentially think means it has one of the smallest populations out of all the penguin species in the world. It's the only member of its genus, so it's a really unique penguin. Unfortunately, we only saw one bird. I didn't get to get fantastic photos of it, but they have like really weird just look on their face. They have this kind of like blonde yellow feathering on top of their head. So we saw one bird at the very end of the trip as we were going back in. We were combing every beach looking for one of these birds, and they breed out there. So that was really cool to see. Yes. I believe it is. What I was reading online though is a lot of the colonies on the South Island have been diminishing in size. They also breed on some smaller islands offshore this South Island, as well as some of the subantarctic islands. But
Maybe 40, 50 years ago.
yeah, I think there's still some there, but it's definitely much harder to see them out there. So another bird I wanted to quickly mention is a common diving petrel. So this bird is so fascinating. It is a tube nose. You know, if you look at its bill, you can see there's like a little, small tube on top of it. But it's essentially a tube nose disguised as an alcid. So alcid are the group of birds that puffins are in, common murres, murrelets, all those things. So we know alcids as these really small birds that dive to get their food. They have really small wings. They have to work really hard to fly, and they don't like flying long distances. All of that is consistent with these common diving petrels, or diving petrels in general. So the niche that's filled by alcids in the northern hemisphere is filled by two different groups of birds in the southern hemisphere. You have the penguins, which are these flightless diving seabirds, and then you also have the diving petrels, which are they can kind of fly, at least better than penguins can. So it's a really interesting example of convergent evolution. These guys were like so eerily similar to alcids. You get close to them, they take flight. For whatever reason, the alcids here are much better about when they're scared and they're taking flight, flying away from the boat. For whatever reason, the diving petrels would just fly with the boat. So for like a minute or two, just have these little birds flying with you, and eventually they realize they can just turn and lose the boat. But they were super cool to see. It's a species we know very little about. There's probably a different species of diving petrel that are endemic to New Zealand, but they live on a very tiny island, and much more work needs to be done to study them. Okay, and then finally, Kaikoura pelagics. Okay, we'll go through this really quickly. So Kaikoura is this town over here. What's really cool is there's a massive deepwater canyon just 4 miles offshore. So kind of like Monterey, and you can see it here, right? There's a shelf, and then right there it gets really close to land. They do their trips there because it's so close, last 2 to 3 hours, and they run 3 times a day. And it's a fantastic location for giant petrels, mollymawks, as well as the great albatrosses. And it is visually stunning. You have this bright blue water close to the shore. You have snow-capped mountains in the background. Just absolutely incredible. I loved every second I spent here. So one of the birds that you see really well on these Kaikoura pelagic trips are the giant petrels. So I'm going to play this video for you here. I want you to listen to those vocalizations. So anytime the giant petrels vocalize, we have one here that's going to come in quickly. This is a posture that they would make when they're kind of ready to go in and throw their weight around. For whatever reason, this bird just gives up. It like does all the work to come in and scare the other birds. And then I'm assuming a more dominant bird was about to come in, and he was like, I'm getting out of here. But these birds, when they would vocalize, it reminded me of like noises you'd hear velociraptors make in Jurassic Park. Like it just did not sound real. These are also bully seabirds. They're kind of like vultures. They're big scavengers, but they're like vultures. If the vulture, knows that you're going to die, but you're not dead yet, and will come and finish the job so it can eat you, is what these birds do. So they're really crazy, very dominant. The first time I went out of Kaikoura 3 times. The first time I went out, there were no wandering albatrosses that showed up. It was all giant petrels, royal albatrosses, and the mollymawks. And no one wanted to mess with the giant petrels, even though with the royal albatrosses, they're a bit smaller, but they are just so aggressive. So you're sitting there watching them go after the chum and just posturing. It's pretty crazy. Okay, I'm gonna move on here. So we're running low on time. The second day I went out though, we got to see some wandering albatrosses show up. So here's a size comparison taken with my cell phone, because this bird was right next to the boat, of a wandering albatross and a giant petrel. So giant petrel is like the size of a mollymawk, like 7 foot wingspan. This is our wandering albatross with like 10, 11 foot wingspans. So when the wandering albatross shows up, it's in charge. It manages the chum. And what I notice is like one giant petrel is kind of allowed to hang out. So the most dominant giant petrel gets to go in there, but he has to watch himself because the wandering albatross will definitely go after him every now and then. With the wandering albatrosses, there would be one that would be running the chum. And if another wandering albatross got too close, so here's our dominant wandering albatross. If another bird got too close, they're going to let it know. And then it gets to kind of sit in all its glory. But it can't sit out there for too long because other birds are getting at the food. So it runs back in and starts throwing its weight around again. So what would happen was one wandering albatross would be kind of stealing the show for quite some time. And you'd have, like 3 or 4 others sitting out in the distance, kind of waiting and working up the courage. And then eventually you'd see one out on the edge just kind of, run off and take flight. And if you watched it, it would slowly be circling just out in the distance, slowly circling. And eventually it built enough speed and maybe enough courage as well. It actually come in and challenge the current dominant albatross. So here we have one flying in and going after that current dominant albatross. And what I observed was pretty well any time a bird worked up enough speed and swooped in, it was able to usurp the current dominant albatross. And then how long that newcomer was able to stay at the chum depended on how hungry the other albatross was. Because sometimes they would swoop in, you'd push out the other one, and then the other one would just sit there and it was fine, it had eaten enough. Other times, that bird would very quickly get up into the air, build up enough speed, and then come in and challenge again. And there was actually one time where this one bird worked, all this time to build up all the speed. It swoops in. Before it even gets to the chum, the other bird goes off, takes flight, does its own few circles, and then comes back and kicks out the other bird. So this was just awesome to watch, and it was happening the whole time. Let's see, is there anything else that I wanted to show here? I'll grab that video. So I'll just share some really fun photos I got. We had the snow-capped mountains. It was really fun to try and get a seabird soaring with the snow-capped mountains in the back. Not the best lighting on this northern giant petrel, but really fun photo to take. And then because these wandering albatrosses were circling around the boat so frequently, it gave you so many opportunities to fit the 11-foot wingspan into one frame here. And this photo, one of my favorite photos, and I love how it also just captures the tip of the wing ripping through the water there. This is technically a Gibson's wandering albatross. I won't get into taxonomy too much, but there's probably like 4 or 5 species within the wandering albatross complex, and that's usually what they get in Kaikoura. Okay, so we went through a lot of information. Real quick, we're just going to summarize some of my thoughts and reflections on the trip. So the first question everyone's probably asking, were all of the pelagics really necessary? Yes, they were. I got to see 28 tube noses, 3 different penguin species, and some other seabirds as well. Each of these trips offers their own, pros and cons, things you can look forward to, and some things you might not get. So, if someone's going to New Zealand and maybe they're not a crazy seabird fanatic, I still recommend going on at least one of these. And you can kind of tailor it to what you're looking for in your trip to New Zealand. But, lots of benefits. Stewart Island, tons of albatrosses. Kaikoura is really where you're going to see wandering albatross most consistently. Tons of trips every day. They're 2 to 3 hours. Take your, drowsiness medicine, put on a scopolamine patch. You're going to be out there for 2 hours. You'll be fine. So anyway, more information on any of that, feel free to ask me. I'm happy to share my experiences. Something I learned on these pelagic trips, though, is like the birds come in so close. So flexible camera gear is a must. I was using a Canon 7D Mark II with 100 to 400 lens, and there were times where it felt too close, even for storm petrels, these tiny little birds. You just felt too zoomed in, and you can see these were some fun shots, but a lot of the bird gets cut off. And this is with me being able to zoom out as well. So if you're going, definitely have flexible camera gear. So another thing I wanted to mention, kiwis. I didn't see any kiwis. I went to New Zealand for 2 weeks. I didn't see any kiwis. What the heck is that about? There's a lot of bad luck. I ended up getting sick on my trip, so I'd come home from a long day birding. I didn't feel like going out at night, stumbling through the forest looking for kiwis. I also got rained out on a couple nights on Stewart Island. I also had no idea what I was doing ahead of time and was kind of relying on talking to people while I was there to figure out how to look for kiwis, and probably wasted a couple days. But that's okay. If you're going to look for kiwis, red lights is better than a standard flashlight. Listen carefully. Kiwis are like one of the only things that's going to be rummaging, in the forest at night. So oftentimes you can hear them before you might see them. There are tons of local guides. These are the different locations. There are 5 different kiwi species, 4 here and then the 5th here. 5 different kiwi species, lots of places to see them. You'll be great. If you're on Stewart Island, go to the golf course. Just don't go to the rugby field. Everyone goes there, and the kiwis are like nowhere near there because there's tons of people just running around making noise. What did I miss? So what didn't I cover here? How much time do we have? We still have, it's this time. Can I go over like 1 or 2 minutes? Okay, perfect. So what didn't I get to in my trip? So there's some birding locations I straight up missed. I essentially missed like the entire center of the country. So you have the Cook Strait, which is supposed to be spectacular. You can take a 3 to 4 hour ferry ride across. It's usually pretty windy going through, so really great seabirding. The fjords down here are supposed to be just stunning. The Central South Island is known for these really big braided rivers, which is home to this endemic shorebird, the black stilt, that's critically endangered. Imagine our black-necked stilt, but it's all black. It's this beautiful, beautiful bird. But they're out there, and you can find them if you look hard enough. Also, you'll see wrybill in more interesting habitat than where I saw it. Non-birding activities. Wine is great in New Zealand, especially in the center of the country. I got a bit of it near Kaikoura, but there's a lot more to have. New Zealand's known for extreme sports and the Great Walks. I didn't do any of that, but maybe you throw that in on your birding trip. I have some general information here. My general impressions, New Zealand's very safe and friendly. They speak English. They have opposite seasons, so keep that in mind. November is mid-spring. They drive on the left side of the road. It's weird, but honestly, you can adjust pretty quickly. It's easy when there are other cars on the road to follow, but when you're out in some remote area and there's no one on the road, there was definitely a moment where I turned out of a parking lot, and for a second, I was not driving properly, and I was like, whoops, we're not in California. And the last thing I'll say for all of you California residents, going to New Zealand is a lot more convenient than you think it is. There are direct flights from SFO to Auckland. I found New Zealand not to be super expensive, and we live in California. It's a very expensive place to live. It did not feel more expensive. The boat trips were on par, a little cheaper in terms of price, as were other things. The time difference blows my mind. It's a 21-hour time difference, but to your body, that feels like a 3-hour time difference just tomorrow, if you think about it. So you get off the plane, and it's like you just flew from the East Coast to the West Coast. Like it really doesn't feel like much to your body. So you can get going right off the plane. You don't need to wait a couple days to lose the jet lag and you feel sick and like garbage. So anyway, other tips: you need a car. Not great public transport. You're going to remote places. For inexpensive lodging, hostels were great. That's what I did. People also do camper vans. They have freedom camping. You can do fantastic birding too with very little travel. I mean, there's so much to see just within a small radius of Auckland. I traveled a ton, but I chose to do that. It wasn't out of necessity. You can have a great time just being around Auckland. When you're out there, communicate with other birders. I picked up so much information from other travelers, locals. On the wrybill boats, I mean, these guys are living is literally getting people to see all of the birds in New Zealand. They can answer any question. And finally, I will say the kakapo cannot be seen by the public. Do not go to New Zealand and think you can find the kakapo. Kakapo lives on a couple of inaccessible predator-free islands that only volunteers and researchers can go to. So beautiful bird, but unfortunately we can't see it live in the wild. I think that's my last slide. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm sorry that was really rushed at the end. Do we have time for questions?
I think we could do like maybe 2 or 3 if we have any burning questions, and I can also help you get in contact with Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer anything. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about all the trips that go out and all the chumming that's going on. Is that stopping the birds from finding their own food?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think about this a lot. Because we always hear, don't go out into the wild, don't feed animals. from what I can, from what I can hear anecdotally, talking to these people, it definitely doesn't seem to be an issue. There, don't seem to be birds. I don't know. I don't think there are population-related changes due to that. If you think about being a seabird in today's world, there are a lot of fishing boats that go out. These fishing boats are throwing all sorts of stuff out. I mean, this is a part of the bird's natural environment. So even if there weren't, a handful of seabird boats going out chumming, there are still fishing boats out there that are doing things that will attract seabirds. So it's something the birds are used to, and it's part of their foraging strategy. So you can kind of go back and forth on whether or not you believe in that. But Trip's been running out of Kaikoura for a very long time, and they haven't had any instances of seabirds coming in and just sitting by a boat and not doing what they should be doing. So, yeah, that's a great question. Yes, Amanda.
I know you said you kind of missed the fairy crown just because it was like storm petrel chaos.
Yes.
But are they like a storm petrel? Do they fly like a petrel?
That's an excellent question. So prions are honestly almost like an honorary petrel or a storm petrel. So like you would be sitting there watching all these storm petrels dancing on the water, walking around and just picking at the surface. The prions are doing the exact same thing. They're just a little bigger. So yeah, so they kind of have floppy flight, but they can glide a little. But they're really just going right over the surface of the water and foraging just like a storm petrel would. Yeah. Awesome. Yes.
What's the one thing you have to absolutely do before you leave?
Oh, yes. Excellent. So you need to submit a visa waiver or to go to New Zealand. This is something I found out at the airport when I was trying to check in. I was shocked. I had read so many things online. I'd watched so many videos. Not a soul mentioned this. So anyway, you can technically do it at the airport, but you could also just do it like a day before and not have to worry about it. So great question. Yeah, visa waiver. Yes. Yes. Yeah. You can do it online. Yeah.
Thank you again to all of you for being here. Thank you for supporting Monterey Audubon Society. A shameless plug that I'm starting to do. If you haven't renewed your membership, we've got information to do that. If you haven't joined our newsletter, you can sign up for that over here. We also have some really cool stickers that we're selling now, as well as some pretty awesome Yeti water bottles. The stickers, my favorite one is our Sea Watch one, which is our 6-week migratory seabird study that we do in November and December. And John helps back up our main scientist for that. So if you're excited about seabirds, Sea Watch is a good one. Thank you.